The bright studio lights of CNN's Political Crossfire shone down on the pristine debate stage as Sarah Palin, former Alaska governor and vice presidential candidate, stood gripping the podium, her face flushed with anger. The camera zoomed in, capturing her finger pointing directly at Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who sat across from her with composed stillness, a stark contrast to Palin's visible rage. "You and your radical friends are destroying this great nation," Palin shouted, her voice cracking with intensity. The studio audience gasped as Palin's unexpected outburst echoed through the room. "You wouldn't know real America if it hit you in the face." Seconds earlier, the show had been proceeding as a standard political debate. Now, the tension in the room was electric, with viewers at home leaning forward in their seats, phones recording, knowing this would be tomorrow's headline. The moderator, Jake Turner, tried to interject, but Palin wouldn't stop. "I've had enough of these fake politicians pretending they care about regular folks when they've never stepped foot in a small town or talked to a hard-working American." Crockett remained eerily calm, her eyes steady, her posture unchanged. The contrast was striking. Palin's chaotic energy versus Crockett's controlled demeanor. Then, as Palin finally paused to catch her breath, Crockett leaned slightly toward her microphone. The entire studio fell silent, waiting. What happened next left Sarah Palin completely speechless for the first time in her political career. The moment Crockett opened her mouth to deliver that single devastating line, everything changed. This wasn't just a political clash. It was about to become a masterclass in how to dismantle someone's entire argument with surgical precision. Before we dive deeper into this explosive confrontation that has everyone talking, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so you never miss the latest political showdowns and analysis. Now let's get back to the moment that has all of America buzzing. The CNN studio that evening was supposed to be hosting a routine discussion on infrastructure legislation. Nobody, not even the producers, expected it would turn into one of the most viral political moments of the year. As the red recording lights blinked across multiple cameras, millions of viewers watched in real time. As the tension between these two political powerhouses reached its breaking point. Palin had arrived at the studio earlier that evening with her trademark confidence, greeting staff with handshakes and small talk about Alaska. Backstage, her team had prepped her with talking points about government spending and conservative values, but something changed when she walked onto that stage and saw Crockett sitting there. The energy shifted immediately. Those who were present in the studio that night described the atmosphere as a pressure cooker about to explode. One production assistant later told reporters that you could feel the hostility radiating off Palin the moment she walked in. Whether it was planned or spontaneous, Palin's eruption was about to catapult both women into a political confrontation that would define their public images for years to come. And now, with Palin's voice still echoing in the studio and Crockett preparing to respond, America was about to witness the kind of political theater that changes careers forever. Sarah Palin stood center stage, her navy blue blazer and American flag pin gleaming under the studio lights. At 59, the former Alaska governor and one-time vice presidential candidate still commanded attention whenever she entered a room. Known for her folksy catchphrases and maverick persona, Palin had built her brand on being the voice of what she called real America, small towns, traditional values, and conservative politics. Since her 2008 campaign alongside John McCain, Palin had transformed herself into a media personality and conservative commentator. Her appearances on Fox News and reality TV had kept her in the public eye, even as her direct political influence had waned. Tonight's CNN appearance was part of her latest media tour, promoting her new book on American Revival. But something about Jasmine Crockett seemed to get under Palin's skin from the moment they were introduced backstage. Perhaps it was the sharp contrast between them. Crockett, at 42, represented a new generation of progressive politicians. As a freshman Democratic representative from Texas, Crockett had quickly made a name for herself with her straight-talking style and unapologetic defense of progressive policies. Before entering Congress, Crockett had built her career as a civil rights attorney representing clients who couldn't afford legal help, fighting against voter suppression and advocating for criminal justice reform. Her rise from legal advocate to congresswoman had been meteoric, fueled by viral committee hearing moments where her precise questioning and legal background allowed her to cut through political theater. The two women couldn't have been more different, not just in their politics, but in their entire approach to public service. Tonight's discussion was supposed to be about infrastructure. CNN moderator Jake Turner explained to the audience, his voice steady despite the rising tension. But clearly, there are deeper disagreements at play here. For viewers at home, the stakes of this confrontation weren't immediately obvious, but political insiders understood exactly what was happening. This was a clash between two visions of America, between the past and future of political discourse in the country. Palin represented the populist wave that had transformed the Republican Party, while Crockett embodied the progressive movement reshaping the Democratic Party. Behind the scenes, network executives were already sensing the ratings gold they had stumbled upon. The control room buzzed with excitement as directors called for more close-up shots of both women. This wasn't just another political discussion, it was rapidly becoming the kind of moment that would drive social media engagement for weeks. For Palin, the stakes were personal. Her relevance in the political sphere had been declining, and she needed a strong performance to promote her book and maintain her position as a conservative voice. For Crockett, this unexpected confrontation represented both a risk and an opportunity, a chance to stand her ground against an established political figure, but also the danger of being drawn into the kind of spectacle that could overshadow her policy work. "I've spent my career serving real Americans," Palin continued, her voice slightly lower but still intense, "not hiding in Washington making speeches while people suffer." The studio audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. CNN had assembled a politically diverse crowd, and the reaction was mixed, some nodding in agreement with Palin, others shaking their heads in disapproval. Jake Turner, a veteran political journalist who had moderated countless debates, attempted to regain control. "Let's try to focus on the infrastructure bill that's currently—" "This is about much more than infrastructure." Palin interrupted, her Alaskan accent becoming more pronounced as her emotion increased. "This is about who gets to define what America is. And I'm sorry, but I won't sit here and let someone who's been in Washington for 5 minutes lecture me about what Americans need." Crockett adjusted her glasses calmly, her fingers interlaced on the table in front of her. The Harvard-educated lawyer's composure was palpable, her experience in high-pressure courtrooms evident in her unruffled demeanor. While Palin's approach was emotional and reactive, Crockett's was methodical and measured. She was gathering information, waiting for the right moment to respond. The contrast between the two women was striking, not just in their demeanor, but in what they represented to their supporters. For conservatives, Palin was a straight-talking champion of traditional values, unafraid to challenge the Washington establishment. For progressives, Crockett embodied the promise of a more inclusive politics, grounded in facts and legal expertise rather than rhetoric. The production team switched to a split-screen view capturing both women simultaneously, Palin's animated expressions on one side, Crockett's steady gaze on the other. The visual juxtaposition only heightened the dramatic tension building in the studio. "We need to be clear about what's happening here," Crockett finally said, speaking for the first time since Palin's outburst began. Her voice was measured, professional, without a hint of the anger that might have been expected. This conversation was supposed to be about American infrastructure, roads, bridges, broadband access for rural communities, things that actually matter to everyday Americans, regardless of political affiliation. The calmness of her response seemed to further agitate Palin, whose right hand gripped the edge of the desk. "Don't talk to me about what matters to real Americans," Palin snapped. "I was governing a state while you were—" "With all due respect, Governor," Crockett interjected, "I was representing Americans who couldn't afford lawyers, fighting to protect their constitutional rights. We may have different backgrounds, but we both claim to care about this country." The exchange was rapidly escalating, the personal attacks threatening to completely derail any substantive policy discussion. For the producers, this was ratings gold. For many viewers, it was emblematic of everything wrong with modern political discourse. Turner made one more attempt to redirect. "Let's take a step back and talk about the specific provisions in the infrastructure package that—" But Palin was already shaking her head, her frustration visible. The former governor had come prepared to discuss her talking points, but now seemed determined to make this about Crockett herself. It was a high-risk strategy. Personal attacks could either land powerfully or backfire spectacularly. What none of the millions watching realized was that in her briefcase, Crockett had brought research on Palin's record, not expecting to use it, but prepared nonetheless. As a former attorney, Crockett never entered any arena without being thoroughly prepared. This preparation was about to become crucial as Palin's attacks grew increasingly personal, and strayed further from policy. The stage was now set for a confrontation that would quickly transcend this single CNN segment and spread across social media, news programs, and political discussions nationwide. As the commercial break approached, viewers had no idea they were about to witness one of the most memorable political exchanges in recent television history. When the cameras returned from commercial break, the tension in the studio had only intensified. The production team had used the break to adjust lighting, creating a more dramatic atmosphere, slightly darker background with stronger key lights on both Palin and Crockett. The effect, whether intentional or not, gave the scene the appearance of a high-stakes political boxing match. Jake Turner, the moderator, tried one final time to steer the conversation back to policy. Let's focus specifically on the rural broadband provisions in the... I'd be happy to discuss that, Palin interrupted, her voice dripping with barely contained anger. But first, I think the American people deserve some honesty about who's sitting at this table. She turned directly toward Crockett, ignoring Turner completely. You present yourself as some champion of the working class, but your policies would destroy the very jobs that keep small towns alive. The camera caught Crockett taking a slow, deliberate breath, the kind of centering technique familiar to anyone who's had to maintain composure in high-pressure situations. Let's talk about jobs, Governor Palin, Crockett responded, her voice steady. The infrastructure bill we're supposed to be discussing would create an estimated 2 million new jobs across all 50 states, including Alaska. But Palin wasn't interested in policy details. She was building toward something bigger, her voice rising with each sentence. You know what? I'm tired of the talking points. I'm tired of politicians like you who've never run a business, never met a payroll, coming on TV with rehearsed lines about jobs you've never created. The studio audience murmured as Palin stood up from her chair, dramatically pointing at Crockett. The CNN directors immediately cut to a wide shot, capturing the full visual of Palin standing while Crockett remained seated, a power move that immediately altered the dynamic on stage. The American people are smarter than you think, Palin continued, her voice now echoing through the studio. They see through this performance. You claim to fight for the little guy while supporting policies that would regulate small businesses out of existence? Turner attempted to intervene. Governor, I'm going to have to ask you to... No, I'm not finished, Palin said sharply. For too long, we've let people like Congresswoman Crockett control the narrative. Well, I'm here to set the record straight. The control room was in a frenzy. What had been planned as a standard political segment was transforming into explosive content that would drive viewership and social media engagement for days. The director made a quick decision to maintain the split screen, capturing every micro-expression on both women's faces. Crockett slowly uncrossed her legs and leaned forward slightly, but still didn't stand up to match Palin's posture. Her body language conveyed confidence rather than intimidation. You talk about standing up for the Constitution, Palin continued, now pacing slightly behind her chair. But your party has been trampling on our freedoms for years. Second Amendment under attack, religious liberty threatened, government getting bigger and more intrusive by the day. The accusations were broad, red meat for conservative viewers, but lacking specific policy critiques. Crockett seemed to recognize the strategy Palin was playing to the cameras, creating sound bites rather than engaging in substantive debate. And let's talk about your so-called legal career, Palin added, her voice dropping to a more ominous tone. Always on the wrong side of law and order, defending criminals while attacking the police who keep our communities safe. Is that your vision for America? This line of attack seemed to touch a nerve. For the first time, Crockett's expression changed slightly, not to anger, but to something more resolute. As a former civil rights attorney, attacks on her legal career were clearly personal. Since you've brought up my legal background, Crockett responded, her voice still measured but with new intensity, let me be clear. I represented Americans exercising their constitutional rights. The same Constitution you claim to defend, Governor, Palin scoffed audibly. There's a difference between constitutional rights and making excuses for... Hey, don't make excuses. Crockett cut in, her voice suddenly sharper. I make arguments based on law and fact. That's what attorneys do. The interruptions seemed to throw Palin momentarily off balance. She had expected Crockett to remain passive, allowing her to dominate the segment. Instead, the Congresswoman was pushing back, though still maintaining her professional demeanor. Well, the facts are, Palin recovered, that your radical agenda would bankrupt this country. Trillions in new spending, higher taxes, more control from Washington. That's not what the Founding Fathers intended. As Palin continued her broadside, split-screen cameras captured Crockett opening a folder she had placed on the desk earlier. The subtle movement didn't interrupt Palin's flow, but viewers at home could see Crockett scanning what appeared to be research documents. "You know what real Americans want?" Palin's voice was now at full volume, practically shouting. "They want their government to get out of their way. They want their God-given freedoms respected. They want—" "Which specific freedoms are you referring to, Governor?" Crockett interjected calmly. The direct question momentarily disrupted Palin's rhythm. "All of them. The ones guaranteed by the Constitution that your party seems to have forgotten about." "Could you point to a specific constitutional freedom that I've opposed?" Crockett pressed, her attorney background evident in the precision of her questioning. Palin hesitated for a split second, just long enough to be noticeable on camera. "Your entire voting record, your support for gun control alone is a direct attack on the Second Amendment." Crockett nodded slightly, as if she'd been expecting this line of attack. "I support the Second Amendment and responsible gun ownership. I voted against our military-held weapons in civilian hands. The Supreme Court has consistently ruled that reasonable regulations are constitutional." The factual response seemed to frustrate Palin, who switched tactics. "Listen to yourself. Always hiding behind technicalities instead of standing for principles. This is exactly why Americans are fed up with career politicians and D.C. lawyers." The irony of Palin, herself a career politician, making this accusation wasn't lost on the studio audience, some of whom exchanged glances. But Palin wasn't finished. Her voice rose even higher as she launched into her most personal attack yet. "You sit there with your fancy degrees and Washington talking points, completely disconnected from regular Americans. When's the last time you really listened, to someone who doesn't share your coastal elite values?" The control room immediately cut to a close-up of Crockett's face, capturing what they hoped would be a reaction shot showing anger or defensiveness. Instead, they caught something unexpected, a flash of what looked like genuine amusement in Crockett's eyes. "Governor Palin," Crockett said, her voice now carrying a hint of something new, confidence tinged with what almost sounded like pity. "I grew up in St. Louis in a working-class neighborhood. My father was a factory worker, my mother a secretary. I was the first in my family to go to college, and I worked 3 jobs to pay my way through school." For the first time, the personal narrative shifted the energy in the room. Even some audience members who had been nodding along with Palin's attacks looked suddenly uncertain. "I became a lawyer not to get rich, but because I saw how the system worked differently depending on who you were and what you looked like," Crockett continued. "So, before you lecture me about disconnection from regular Americans, you might want to learn who you're talking to." Palin seemed momentarily thrown by the personal background she clearly hadn't been briefed on, but quickly recovered. "Well, that's a nice story, but your policies tell a different—" "They're not stories, Governor. They're facts," Crockett said firmly. "Just like it's a fact that the infrastructure bill we're supposed to be discussing would bring broadband internet to rural communities in Alaska, just like it's a fact that it would repair bridges and roads in every state in this country." The sudden pivot back to policy substance created a jarring contrast with Palin's emotional attacks. Viewers could see the former governor recalibrating, trying to decide how to respond. "Facts matter," Crockett added into the momentary silence. "At least, they should in political discourse." Something in that simple statement seemed to trigger Palin. Perhaps it was the implicit criticism of her approach, or perhaps it was frustration at Crockett's refusal to be provoked into an emotional response. Whatever the cause, Palin's next outburst would become the defining moment of the exchange. Her face flushing a deeper shade of red, Palin slammed her hand on the desk. "Enough with the condescension! You and your elitist friends think you're so much smarter than everyone else. You look down on people of faith, on gun owners, on anyone who doesn't embrace your woke ideology." The outburst was so sudden and loud that the moderator physically recoiled. The control room immediately switched to a wide shot, capturing the full tableau. Palin standing, leaning forward aggressively, her face contorted with anger. Crockett still seated, composed but alert, like a chess player who's just seen their opponent make a critical error. The American people are sick of it, Palin shouted, her voice now echoing through the studio. Sick of being talked down to by people like you who've never built anything, never created a job, never lived outside your bubble of liberal groupthink. The outburst had crossed a line from passionate disagreement to something that felt personally hostile. Even Jake Turner, an experienced moderator who had witnessed countless heated political exchanges, looked genuinely alarmed. Governor Palin, he interjected firmly, we need to maintain a respectful... But Palin was too far gone, too caught up in her emotional momentum to be reined in by a moderator's gentle reminder. I've had it with the disrespect, with the smugness, with the absolute contempt for traditional values and the people who hold them. As Palin's tirade continued, cameras caught Crockett calmly opening another folder, examining its contents with the methodical focus of someone preparing to present evidence in court. Whatever was in that folder, it was about to change the course of this already explosive confrontation. And in the CNN control room, producers were making the decision to extend the segment beyond its scheduled time slot. What had begun as a routine policy discussion had transformed into the kind of raw, unscripted political theater that news networks dream about. Nobody was going to cut this short. Not when Congresswoman Crockett was clearly preparing to respond to the most aggressive public attack of her political career. The stage was set for the moment of truth. The response that would either cement Crockett's reputation as a rising political star or leave her overwhelmed by Palin's emotional onslaught. As Sarah Palin's shouting finally subsided, the studio fell into a tense silence. Viewers at home could almost feel the electricity through their screens. The CNN director held on a wide shot, capturing both women, Palin standing slightly breathless from her tirade, and Crockett still seated, her expression unreadable. Jake Turner, the moderator, looked between them, uncertain whether to intervene or let the moment play out. He chose the latter, recognizing that whatever came next would be compelling television. Jasmine Crockett slowly closed the folder she had been examining and placed both hands flat on the table before her. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet yet crystal clear, forcing everyone to listen carefully. "Governor Palin," she began, "before I respond to what you've said, I'd like to ask you one simple question." Palin, still standing, gave a dismissive wave of her hand. "More deflection, I'm sure." "No," Crockett replied evenly. "Just a straightforward question. Have you actually read the infrastructure bill we're discussing today?" The question hung in the air for a beat. It was simple, direct, and devastating in its implication. Palin's expression flickered, a micro-expression caught perfectly by the high-definition cameras. But it was the look of someone caught unprepared, and it lasted only a fraction of a second before she recovered. "Of course I understand what's in the bill," Palin responded, noticeably avoiding a direct yes or no. "It's thousands of pages of liberal wish list items that would drive our national debt through the roof." Crockett nodded slowly, as if Palin's non-answer had confirmed something. Then, with deliberate movements, she opened the folder again and withdrew a single sheet of paper. "Governor Palin," she said, her voice remaining calm but taking on a new clarity and authority, "I'm not asking if you understand what conservative talking points say is in the bill. I'm asking if you've actually read the legislation itself." Before Palin could respond, Crockett continued, "Because on page 237 there's a provision that would bring high-speed internet to 24,000 rural Alaskan households. On page 418, they're $3.00. $5 billion for weatherization of homes in cold weather states like Alaska. On page 562, there's specific funding for tribal lands in your state that lack basic water infrastructure." The studio had gone completely still. Even the camera operators seemed transfixed by the methodical dissection taking place. "These aren't talking points, Governor. They're specific provisions I've taken the time to review, because I believe legislation matters, details matter, facts matter." Palin's face had transformed. The aggressive confidence was giving way to something that looked remarkably like uncertainty. "I don't need to," she began, but Crockett gently raised her hand. "You asked when was the last time I listened to someone who doesn't share my values," Crockett said. "I listen every day. It's my job. I've read hundreds of letters from conservatives in my district who disagree with me on many issues but still deserve representation. I've met with them, heard their concerns, and looked for common ground." She paused, looking directly at Palin. "When was the last time you read something you disagreed with, Governor? When was the last time you engaged with ideas instead of attacking the people who hold them? The question landed like a precision strike. It wasn't angry or emotional, it was a genuine inquiry that cut to the heart of Palin's approach to political discourse. Palin, still standing but now looking increasingly uncomfortable in that position, attempted to recover. This is exactly the kind of gotcha question that... It's not a gotcha question to ask if you've done the basic homework before coming on national television to discuss legislation. Crockett interjected, her voice still remarkably calm. It's not elitist to expect public figures to be informed about the policies they're criticizing. For the first time, a murmur ran through the studio audience. The dynamic had shifted completely. What had begun as Palin's aggressive attack was transforming into something else entirely, a masterclass in political counterpunching. You know, Crockett continued, we can disagree about policy, that's healthy in a democracy. What's not healthy is this kind of performative anger that prioritizes emotional reaction over substantive debate. Palin, clearly wanting to regain control of the narrative, tried to interrupt. The American people don't want lectures on... And then it happened. The moment that would be clipped, shared, analyzed, and remembered long after the rest of the segment was forgotten. Jasmine Crockett, still seated, looked directly at Sarah Palin and delivered the line that would silence the former governor and set social media ablaze. Governor Palin, you're entitled to your own opinions, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And shouting doesn't make your arguments any more factual or your feelings any more constitutional. The precision of the statement, delivered without a raised voice but with unmistakable authority, seemed to physically stop Palin in her tracks. For perhaps the first time in her public career, the famously verbose former governor was completely speechless. The silence that followed lasted only seconds but felt much longer. The CNN control room, recognizing they had just captured television gold, immediately cued the director to hold on Palin's reaction. Viewers across America witnessed something remarkable. Sarah Palin, mouth slightly open, no words coming out, completely blindsided by the calm dismantling of her entire approach. When Palin finally did speak, her voice had lost its previous force. Well, I think the American people can see clearly who's really out of touch here, she said. But the statement sounded hollow, even to her supporters in the audience. Crockett didn't press her advantage with further attacks. Instead, she pivoted back to substance. I'd be happy to discuss the actual infrastructure bill if you'd like, Governor. The provisions for Alaska are quite substantial, and they would create jobs in exactly the rural communities you claim to champion. The offer to return to policy discussion rather than continue the personal confrontation only highlighted the contrast between the two women's approaches. Crockett wasn't interested in humiliating Palin. She had made her point and was ready to move on to matters of substance. Jake Turner, sensing an opportunity to salvage some policy discussion from what had become a remarkable personal confrontation, jumped in. Let's take a moment to discuss those specific provisions for Alaska that Congresswoman Crockett mentioned. But the damage was done. Palin's confident demeanor had evaporated, replaced by a stiff smile that didn't reach her eyes. She slowly sat back down, adjusting her blazer in what body language experts would later describe as a classic self-comfort gesture. Of course, Palin said, her voice noticeably subdued. I'm always concerned about infrastructure needs in my home state. The remainder of the segment proceeded with Crockett calmly outlining specific provisions of the bill while Palin offered occasional brief responses, clearly having abandoned her previous aggressive strategy. But viewers knew they had witnessed something significant. A public figure known for her verbal pugilism had been completely disarmed not by matching her anger, but by calmly exposing the emptiness behind it. As the segment drew to a close, Turner turned to both women for final thoughts. Governor Palin, any closing remarks on the infrastructure discussion? Palin, having somewhat regained her composure, offered a generic statement about fiscal responsibility that lacked the fire of her earlier comments. And Congresswoman Crockett? Crockett nodded thoughtfully. I'd just say that despite our differences, I believe most Americans want the same things: good jobs, safe communities, and opportunities for their children. The details of how we get there matter, which is why I'll always prioritize substance over sound bites. The subtle callback to her decisive moment wasn't lost on viewers, many of whom were already sharing clips of the exchange on social media. As the cameras prepared to cut away, a final split screen showed the two women, Palin still visibly uncomfortable, Crockett composed and focused. In living rooms across America, People who had tuned in expecting routine political theater were instead texting friends and family. "Are you watching this?" Palin just got completely shut down. The moment was transcending standard political boundaries, with even conservative viewers acknowledging they had witnessed something remarkable. A perfect example of how facts, calmly presented, could be more powerful than the loudest shouting. As the segment ended and the program cut to commercial, network executives were already making plans to promote the exchange across all their platforms. They knew what they had captured, a rare moment of authentic political confrontation that would be analyzed in communication classes and political strategy sessions for years to come. What nobody in the studio realized yet was just how far-reaching the impact of those 15 words, "Shouting doesn't make your arguments any more factual or your feelings any more constitutional," would become in the hours and days ahead. Within minutes of the CNN segment ending, clips of the exchange between Jasmine Crockett and Sarah Palin began flooding social media platforms. The moment Crockett delivered her now famous line, "Shouting doesn't make your arguments any more factual or your feelings any more constitutional," was being shared at a rate that network analytics teams described as unprecedented for a political exchange. YELLS. On X, formerly Twitter, shouting "Incent factual" began trending nationally within 20 minutes, quickly followed by Crockett, Palin's Palin. TikTok creators were already setting the clip to music, with remixes and reaction videos multiplying by the minute. The phrase was being turned into memes, t-shirt designs, and coffee mug slogans almost in real time. CNN's social media team, recognizing the viral potential immediately, had posted the full exchange on their platforms before the hour was out. The clip received more views in its first hour than any political content the network had posted in the previous year. Inside the studio, as makeup artists removed their microphones, Palin avoided eye contact with Crockett, quickly gathering her notes and exiting with her staff. According to production assistants who witnessed the scene, Palin could be heard telling an aide, "This is how they always twist things," though it wasn't clear what twist she was referring to in an exchange that had been broadcast live and unedited. Crockett, meanwhile, remained composed, thanking the production staff and moderator before departing quietly with her team. When a junior producer whispered that the clip was blowing up online, Crockett simply nodded and said, "The substance is what matters, not the spectacle," a comment that would itself be shared widely when the producer posted it on social media later that evening. Back at CNN headquarters, network executives were already planning expanded coverage. Ratings data showed that viewership had spiked dramatically during the exchange, with millions of additional viewers tuning in as word of the confrontation spread through text messages and social media alerts. "We need panel discussions analyzing this for tomorrow's programs," one executive was overheard telling the programming team. Get political communications experts, body language analysts, the works. By the time the 11 o'clock news broadcasts began across the country, the confrontation had become the lead story, not just on CNN, but on competing networks as well. News anchors introduced the segment with phrases like "remarkable exchange" and "unexpected political moment" before playing the clip that Americans couldn't stop watching. Fox News, where Palin had been a contributor, took a different approach, focusing on what they called Crockett's rehearsed attack line, and suggesting the entire confrontation had been a planned ambush. But even their viewers were sharing the clip, many commenting that regardless of politics, the moment had been extraordinary television. On late-night comedy shows, writers were frantically reworking monologues to incorporate the exchange. Sarah Palin finally met someone who could out-Palin Sarah Palin without raising her voice, one host quipped, to thunderous applause. By midnight Eastern Time, political strategists from both parties were weighing in. A veteran Republican consultant told MSNBC, "Love her or hate her, what Crockett did tonight was textbook political jujitsu. She used Palin's own energy against her without ever matching the aggression." A Democratic strategist countered on Fox News, "This wasn't about political tactics. This was about someone who had done their homework versus someone relying on talking points and volume." The personal and political implications for both women became apparent by the following morning. Crockett's social media followers had increased by hundreds of thousands overnight. Interview requests flooded her office, and Democratic leadership was reportedly discussing giving her more prominent committee assignments and speaking roles. For Palin, the fallout was mixed. Her core supporters rallied around her, claiming she had been ambushed and disrespected. But viewership data showed that many independent voters, and even some conservatives, had been impressed by Crockett's composed response to what they viewed as an unnecessarily aggressive attack. Palin's scheduled book tour appearances suddenly faced heightened scrutiny. Would she address the confrontation? Would she modify her famously combative style in response to how effectively Crockett had countered it? 3 days after the exchange, the implications extended beyond the two individuals involved. Political commentators began noting subtle changes in the tone of cable news debates. Guests who attempted to use Palin-style tactics of shouting and personal attacks were being met with variations of Crockett's line by both moderators and fellow panelists. We might be witnessing the beginning of a shift in political discourse. One Columbia University professor of political communication observed in a widely shared essay, Crockett demonstrated that calm factuality can be more compelling than emotional appeals when presented with confidence and authority. By the 1-week mark, polling data showed something remarkable. 72% of Americans who had seen the clip, including 54% of self-identified Republicans, said they found Crockett's approach more effective than Palin's, regardless of whether they agreed with her politics. The phrase, "shouting doesn't make your arguments any more factual," began appearing in high school debate competitions, college classrooms, and even corporate boardrooms, a shorthand for prioritizing substance over volume. Palin eventually addressed the confrontation in a Fox News interview, claiming she had been edited unfairly, the claim easily disproven by the unedited footage, and insisting that her passion was what her supporters appreciated about her. But even the sympathetic interviewer noted that the clip had clearly resonated with people across the political spectrum. For Crockett, the moment became a cornerstone of her rising political profile, though she consistently downplayed it in interviews, preferring to focus on policy issues. That exchange wasn't about clever lines, she told a Sunday morning talk show. It was about the fundamental importance of engaging with the substance of legislation rather than relying on preconceived narratives. Political scientists and communications researchers would later identify the Crockett-Palin exchange as a significant moment in evolving political discourse, an example of how the traditional norms of political confrontation could be upended not by matching aggression with aggression, but by calmly exposing the emptiness behind purely emotional appeals. As one viral tweet summarized it, Palin brought a shouting match to a fact fight, and Crockett showed why that never works. The confrontation even made its way into political strategy sessions for both parties. Democratic consultants highlighted Crockett's preparation and composure as a model for candidates facing aggressive opponents. Republican strategists, meanwhile, began advising clients to ensure they were thoroughly briefed on policy details before engaging in public debates, a direct response to Palin's evident unpreparedness. 6 months later, when asked about the exchange during a profile interview, Crockett reflected thoughtfully. That moment wasn't about winning an argument or embarrassing anyone. It was about demonstrating that our political discourse can and should be grounded in factual substance rather than emotional performance. She paused before adding, "The American people deserve representatives who've done their homework, who respect the complexity of governance enough to actually read the legislation they're discussing. That's not an elitist expectation. It's the minimum requirement for responsible public service." The clip of that moment continued to resurface whenever political discussions turned particularly heated or fact-free, a reminder that in an era often characterized by noise and fury, sometimes the most powerful response is calm clarity. As we close this account of one of the most memorable political confrontations in recent years, we'd like to remind our viewers to subscribe to our channel for more in-depth political analysis and behind-the-scenes looks at the moments that shape our national discourse. Hit that like button if you found this breakdown illuminating, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Was this a turning point in political communication or just a viral moment that will fade with time? And the conversation continues, and we want to hear your voice, expressed factually, of course, with or without shouting.